when did you decide the technique you were going to use to tell this story? I'm always curious of, I mean, you did, you know, you didn't insert, you could have had a narrative teller. Did you know going in this was how you were going to tell the story?
We've made verite films together before, and it's something that we're comfortable with. And actually in conversation with the Texas Boys State leadership, when we were first talking through wanting to make this film, what they were interested in as well was a really experiential, stay here and live with us for the week and really get into it and see what it's like. Don't just parachute in and get a taste of it and leave, because that's not going to feel the same way that it feels for these guys or girls. So that was what we do. That's what we like to do. We like to just be there in it, you know, and it was intense and it went very fast. So this was new for us because of how fast and furious this week was. But
well, that to me is, I just, obviously I apologize for all the logistic questions, but that's like, you didn't have any room for error.
No.
You know, you had a finite, you know, this isn't a case where you had 2 years to gather material. And then you had to be ready for this. I guess I got a number of questions going on this front, but number one, the negotiations with Boys State, was it always pretty easy, or was there some skepticism?
I think there was a little skepticism as outsiders to Texas and to the program, but they looked at our body of work, and I think that they appreciated that we were proposing to follow boys through the program. And they like to say that the program really transforms these young men, and we weren't sure if that was just what they were telling us or if that was really true. But we said, we're going to find some boys that we can just kind of travel on this journey with. And I think they liked that approach. And they were surprisingly open-minded. And I think that's actually a reflection of the program itself. It's the people who run it. They're really trying to embrace openness and change. And so they said they were going to take a chance on us.
How did you embed yourself?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, first we had to find the people we were going to follow. That was going to be critical to us.
So you knew, okay, then you answered my next question, which was, did you in the moment decide who you're going to follow, or how did you? So go ahead, walk me through both of those questions. Yeah, go ahead.
There's no way we would have been able to cast on the fly, because again, this was like drinking from a fire hose. It moved so quickly for the people experiencing the program, but also for us trying to capture it. I mean, no way were we going to find the characters while it was happening. So we knew we needed to find most of the people we were going to follow way before the event. So 3 months before it started, we got on the phone and started calling people. We had a list of 1,100 boys. And so, you know, you make those phone calls. Phones were not great. So we went to Texas.
We discovered that teenage boys are not very good on the phone.
Okay.
And so we had to actually
I have a teenage boy and a teenage girl. I can
like old school.
I can recommend him. That is very true. My son. Yes. No. Yes. Okay.
So we went to Texas. We drove around. We filmed in people's living rooms. We filmed with their families. We filmed with their prize steer. We filmed a harpist. We filmed a science star. And you know, we met a lot of amazing kids. I will tell you though, the minute that we met the guys who ended up being in our films, it was very obvious to us. It's kind of irrational, maybe. It's not an irrational decision, but yeah.
Okay, let me ask this question. Did you worry that you identified your characters? Did you worry that was going to influence their behavior at Boys State?
I think that, well, we're certainly worried about whether or not they would do well at Boys State first. And then I think secondarily, whether our involvement in their experience would have an effect on what happened. And I think it's a little hard to parse out to what extent we might have influenced their choices or any outcome. I think it's not unlike politics, national politics. The attention of the media can have a validating effect.
Of course.
But I think fundamentally these boys, as you probably are, young men now, you probably recognize, are really who they are, and wonderfully confident and unique and sort of comfortable in front of the camera, I think. And that was natural. And I think that that's what we liked about them. And and yet we didn't know how well they do.
I mean, I think also the question, I mean, you could ask them the same question. I do think
Right.
that my guess is that it added a little bit of confidence to them.
Okay.
You know, we're paying attention, we're listening, because you have some, you know, whatever. So I think that was part of it. But ask them.
So watching this and watching the tactics that were used, I wondered, boy, do we have to look at ourselves in the mirror? Is this what 17-year-olds think politics and think government is about? I assume that is a message you hope some people got from this?
I mean, I think that we saw, I mean, a lot of what we see, for better and for worse, mirrored on the national stage or on every level of real politics.
It felt like a reflection. It felt like a reflection of just what is, not what should be, not what we wish, of just what is. You know, and we can, trust me, I get paid to sit back and judge, right? But it is. Did you expect that to be one of the stories of this documentary?
I think we really hoped. I mean, I think that's what drew us to the program initially, was that the idea that it would provide a prism to understand our political moment. And I don't know if we expected it to yield some kind of simplistic answer. I think it mirrors the complexity of our system and the choices people make who are running for office in our political system. And so I think that what did surprise us, though, is I think we had a fear that it would devolve into a kind of Lord of the Flies maelstrom. And in fact, we saw things that made us very hopeful, that these young men, you know, who might have wild impulses could be summoned to a higher calling if the right person found a way to reach them. And that I think we, of course, we see as well on the national stage, but I think that was great to see.
Well, let's bring in some of the subjects. How about a little a round of applause at home, if you can give it to them. We've got Rene Otero, Ben Feinstein, Robert MacDougall, and Stephen Garza right here. Let's check them out. Well, gentlemen, Ben, you've got to unmute. There you go.
There we go.
First of all, is this for Rene, Stephen, Ben, Robert, is this the first time you have seen a cut of this film, or did you see it earlier?
This is actually my first time watching it.
Yeah? What'd you think of it, Robert? What'd you think of, let me ask you this. What do you think of what you saw of yourself?
I found it to be largely accurate in my experience there. I really enjoyed it. Thought it was really well done.
By the way, I should let folks know I really enjoyed the banter you guys had with each other still when we were all checking in. It's clear to me a bond has been formed, which I think is one of the things there, one of the important aspects of this. Rene, what do you think of what you saw in yourself?
Well, frankly, this is my 7th time watching the film, but every time I'm still a little surprised. I was like, dang, that was me 2 years ago? And I had a finite time on this earth, very short amount of time, so 2 years is a long time. So it's really interesting every time being reconfronted with those memories. But I really do believe that it was a very accurate, descriptor of my story as well, to harken back to what Robert was saying. But it was really like me looking in the mirror and recognizing how much change happened over those 2 years, and that the precipice of all that change was, frankly, the fact that I even went through Boys State in the first place.
Ben?
Well, I had about 20 pounds less muscle on me, and I was 3 inches taller. And that's a long story with prosthetics that we're not going to get into tonight. But it was I saw it back in last August originally. I mean, I've seen it a few times since, and every time I watch it, I get something new. And it's really cool to have a big, super important moment in your life and have all these little chapters captured and these moments that you forgot happened, and you get to relive them. And it always brings a smile to my face.
You brought up the fact that this is archived forever. We'll get into that on Meet the Press in 2028. Stephen.
Yeah.
What'd you think of how you were portrayed and how you looked?
Well, compared 2 years ago, me and Robert switched hairstyles. I have the very long hair and he has very short hair.
West Point will do that to a guy, huh?
We were watching with my family right now, and all I can think about is, man, I'm kind of awkward for a fair bit of the movie. But we've all grown, and we're all still in contact very much so. So I think it was a very accurate portrayal of how I was feeling, and I think you can feel the anxiety that I had at that moment. I felt the anxiety in the living room reliving it. So.
What's something about this experience? And Robert, I want to start with you. You talked about it, West Point, there, and you're there now. How important has Boise State been in influencing how you are right now and how you interact?
So I would have to say that the biggest way Boise State influenced me was showing me a different side of politics, a different side of young people. I got there expecting it to be a real political game, real cutthroat, polarized political game, and came out realizing that in the end, most of us want the same thing. Most of us can have those conversations and come to a conclusion and work towards these common goals together. And that's going to be very hopeful for the future with young people getting more and more into politics.
Rene, has it changed the way you react to politics, maybe when you see it debated on social media right now, after going through it, after sort of being it in yourself, and you see, do you look at it differently? You look at social media differently? Do you look at how politicians react differently?
I think I definitely do. If there's one thing that the experience at Boise State taught me, is that I don't ever want to be a politician. That dream died. And it's not for anything negative, but it was really just the fact that, I'm beginning to realize that, I have a passion for politics, but not in the way that I thought I did. My ultimate goal was trying to keep everything together, get everybody to agree. But then I realized people aren't willing to agree for their own reasons. And so when I see things on social media and I see an unwillingness to negotiate, or even for a politician to say something so simple as in the murders of Black bodies by police officers is heinous, like that's easy to say, I begin to understand that they are playing a game and that this was never about, compromise. But I have a lot more faith, per se, as very nihilistic as that sounds, a lot more faith, per se, on like the local scale politics instead, because I do feel like that is where connection is supposed to happen.
Ben, do you look at Congress and you watch their gridlock? Do you look at it differently after experiencing what you experienced at Boise State? Do you wonder, why is it that they can't work this out sometimes?
I don't know if that narrative is that simple, because at Boise State, as well as in real Congress, you see examples of small progress at small levels and handshake deals and looking someone in the eye and, looking at them as an American and a human being rather than a Republican or a Democrat or a Federalist or a Nationalist. Just today, I'm sitting in the car and we're in the midst of, massive controversy over COVID-19 and police brutality. But, the Senate just passed an act preserving America's wildlife, right? The Great American Outdoors Act. And no one's talking, right? Because it doesn't make headlines, but it happens. And at Texas Boise State, I saw individuals from every walk of life, every race, every ethnicity, every socioeconomic background get along and make it work. And there were virulent instances of unacceptable behavior, and it happened, and there's no sense denying it. But at a broad level, at the level of guys sharing a room or sharing a game of dodgeball or whatever, it was really inspiring to see it all come together. And to get 1,100 boys to do anything cohesive, let alone run the process, requires a lot of cooperation at every level. And, that made me proud of it.
Stephen, you getting engaged in politics at 14 was very familiar to me. I was 14 the first time I got involved. I remember I had a cousin working on a campaign and I thought this was going to be great. I'm curious, after Boise State, a couple years later, do you feel the same sense of idealism still?
Yes, even more so.
Good.
I think my belief in I'm an idealist, and my belief that people can come together for the common good and kind of reach ground was further proved to me at Boise State. I may have lost a general election, But people who didn't agree with my positions or my beliefs, or that, you know, they were super pro-gun and didn't want any kind of reform, but believed in me as a leader to work with them if I got elected and come to a kind of compromise. That idea, that belief was reinforced to me throughout the process that, hey, maybe we're not there yet, but I think we're a lot closer than most people think, and definitely a lot closer than the adults are.
Amanda and Jesse, what do you make of their experiences right now? I have to say, right now you would sit there and say this is a pretty good endorsement for Boise State.
I mean, I think they're validating why we wanted to follow them and tell this story. They speak so much more thoughtfully than we ever could about politics and the program. I think really they're the best ambassadors for what this film has to say about politics. And I don't know. I think they're very hopeful, and that makes me feel better. I think the message of throwing yourself into a process and learning to understand it is an inspiring one. I mean, it's, you know, not standing on the sidelines, but really understanding that democracy is not a spectator sport. And I think that's like a principle of the program that I happen to believe in, and I think I hear shared in their sentiments.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the first things that the chairman of Texas Boys State said to me on the phone when we did call them. I mean, they believe so fundamentally in learn by doing. And I think that's what happened for all these guys. Like, it's an intense week, and you learn about yourself, you learn about politics, you learn, you know, I mean, on some level, I wish I could take a time machine and go back and do that for myself, but there it is.
I'm curious, and I throw it out here for anybody. If this were mixed gendered, how would things change? Amanda, you go. Amanda, you start with that answer, since you're the only one. You're the only female here. So let me start with your thoughts. I'm sure you've thought about this question.
I mean, I can't wait to make the girls' state. You know, I can't wait to see what happens at Girls State. I think, you know, we came to the Boise State, the Texas Boise State, because of that article. But I think, you know, getting there really was, and then having a window on sort of, you know, boyhood, as it were, was really kind of an amazing. I wasn't expecting how interesting and wonderful that was going to be, especially now. How are people growing up with everything that's going on? So I think co-ed, I mean, I imagine it would probably run about the same as, I don't know, actually. I mean, I'm interested in Girls State separately. I don't know of any co-ed program. I imagine that's where they're headed, honestly. It feels like that's where it's going, but I don't actually.
You would assume. It's funny you say that. I don't have an opinion yet of what would be, whether what would be the better out. You know, it's almost like, okay, let's try. But I'm curious with Rene, Stephen, Rene, you first. I'm sure you guys talked about this, or at least after. Do you think the experience would have been different if it was co-ed?
I absolutely do think so. Because again, it's as Amanda does say, she came into this space and she saw like the wonders of boyhood of living in Texas, right? And we're all still very much so young. We haven't even interacted with the real world yet, and people who aren't alike to us. So I feel like there's a really, you know, heavy focus. There's going to be a heavy clash between what girlhood is like and what boyhood is like, because I would assume that they are going to be fundamentally different. But the way that they interact is not really for me to speak on, because, you know, I can't necessarily say how, you know, masculinity affects, you know, women, because I'm not a woman. So.
Stephen?
Yeah, most definitely. And a lot of people have come up to me in the past few months after seeing the film and talk about how, for example, there were 1,100 boys debating abortion with not a single girl in the room or a single woman in the room. And so I believe that girls would have something to say about that, you know, about their own body and their own choices and all that. So I think definitely I agree with Amanda. I do believe that the program is heading there. Don't know how soon. But yeah.
I think one thing that struck us was that the program is a little bit like our country in that it has 1 foot in the 1950s and 1 foot in the 21st
Yes.
century. And it's a kind of uneasy balance, but that's
a great way of putting it.
That's where we're at. And I love when people, when Stephen said at the beginning of the film, people state. I mean, sort of a question we're all asking ourselves. What about people state? And of course, I mean, that's really the larger state we live in. But I think as filmmakers, we'd certainly love to tell the story of people state for young people.
Robert, your thoughts on this?
So I haven't actually thought too much on the issue, I will admit, but like Stephen said, I imagine that some of the topics we debated would have gone a lot differently had there been women in the room.
And Ben?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Robert, and Stephen to an extent as well. I think, and because I counseled for Boys State this year and we did it online, and one of the differences with doing it online is you don't have a crowd of 1,000 guys right there, right? And everyone's meeting on Zoom. And there were people in that film that would shout things like, let's castrate rapists, or, you know, just crazy stuff, right? And, you know, it would get a cheer out of 500 guys and everyone would go crazy. And then that would become like the policy of a major candidate, right?
Did you get that on Zoom? Or how did it change on Zoom?
Well, on Zoom, you know, the crowd's muted. You can't say something like that and expect to get the rise and make it work. So it's going to be much more tame and less extreme and less polarizing on it. And I feel like, I'm not saying that if you added, you know, if you made half the room women instead of, you know, men, it would mute everyone. But it would, I think it would have the same effect of if you shout, let's castrate rapists to a room of 500 women, you're going to get a different reaction in a room of 500 men. And I feel like there, and I can't speak to it much because, like Rene said, I'm not a woman. I don't know, right? But at the same time, I definitely feel like a lot of the dynamics of how stuff happens, how people play to crowds, how the energy works is going to change if it's not just a bunch of 17-year-old boys and it's 17-year-old girls too.
Amanda and Jesse, I think the comparison of a Zoom Boys State versus, I find that to be interesting without the crowds. I mean, that we may have solved gridlock in Congress. They should have to govern by Zoom, right? They are accountable for themselves.
I think if we weren't all living this reality, we would have maybe been more interested in making that film of 2020 Boys State. I really admire the program for, I think they're one of only two state programs in the country that was able to actually pivot and make their program virtual this year. And I was glad to see that our guys are returning to be counselors. And I did ask Ben to surreptitiously send me some screenshots so I could over his shoulder.
All right, let's if you guys could make we're pretty close to the end here. What's one way you'd like to see Boys State change? And Robert, I'll start with you.
So I really loved Boys State as it was. To be honest, I can't think of too many direct changes I would make, although it might be nice if it got a little more representation from the urban areas in Texas. The way it's done with people coming from each high school, it's hard for the large urban areas, large urban high schools, population centers to send lots of people. So that might change the demographic a little bit, shift it in a slightly different direction.
Very interesting. Ben?
Speaking as a major, you know, like a political actor in it, I think a big difference between Boys State and our current political scene is the presence of media, data, polls, stuff like that. And as someone who's involved with the program still, they're working towards it. There are discussions happening, and it's not something that we don't see. But I mean, when it's like when I was running the Federalist Party, like there's a scene where I'm in like a cafeteria and I'm asking a nationalist, are you trying to impeach your chair? And that wasn't me trying to spread rumors. That was me genuinely having no idea what was going on, right? And in real politics, that would never happen, right? You would know something that big would come up. And I think a shift more to the 21st century would involve more media, analytics, you know, data, that kind of stuff.
So what you're saying is you need Boys State memes. That's what you really need. We want a lot more memes.
That's what I'm saying.
Stephen, is there something you would what would you make a change, and if so, what would it be?
Yeah, there's two factors, and one of them Ben brought up a few months ago was the what's absent from Boys State is money, is the influence of money in our electoral process.
Yeah.
So there's no idea how that would work out in the simulation of government, but it is a huge aspect that's not present in Boise State, that we're not, there's no lobbyists, candidates aren't corrupted or influenced to vote one way or another or take a position based on the money they're getting to their campaign. And the second thing definitely is just the overall representation of Boise State in terms of races. Yeah. For Texas being as diverse as it is, especially in my city of Houston, which is like a melting pot, it is overwhelmingly white. And it skews very conservative, even though, like, for example, Beto O'Rourke in 2018 came within 3% of winning the state of Texas. So,
if Robert's idea of improving participation from urban high schools, you think that's would solve that problem, Stephen?
Yeah, it would go a long way to help out more kids to be able to go to the program instead of those in the country that can afford to send more. Definitely, it would open that opportunity for more people from different races and from various political ideologies to get together, because the program does run a fair bit wide and a fair bit conservative, and it's not really reflective of the state of Texas. And
Rene, it's something you might change.
I first would like to double down on that. Really would like some diversity. It was kind of hard because all the brothers was few and far between, but you know what? I made. But if there's one thing I really do want to change is that Boise State is supposed to be a political simulation, and the most vulnerable population is included in terms of like mentally, right? Like 17-year-old boys are going to absorb and to learn the most, I think, in this age cohort. So I think what would be best is to maybe divest a little bit away from the reality of national politics, because they're messy as is, and be able to teach a more form of polite and accountable politics. Per se, create a federal or state electoral commission, alongside it, so we can see how we verify voting, because voting was really kind of up to the party. We didn't have any specific of voting that was uniform, and that's kind of how voter suppression works in the United States today. The inability to create a uniform policy that says, hey, no voter ID laws, hey, polling stations need to be in every district, and I think when we replicate that in a simulation, by the time some of us grow up to be politicians, we're like, hey, where is that now? And I think that would to be, a little more effective with reforming the way we do politics and elections in this country.
Well, gentlemen, you for a great endorsement for the Boise State program. That's for sure. Amanda and Jesse, I'll be honest though, I don't know. I'm torn on it in that, the emphasis on do we want them dealing with the reality of the way politics is, or should they be learning this in the way as it should be, or whatever that, and of course, what does should be mean, right? We would all disagree on that, but I'm finding myself constantly torn with that, both in watching the film and listening to this conversation. I'm glad they're educated in the reality of politics, but is that a good thing? And I guess that was the point, right, Amanda and Jesse, you guys are trying to introduce to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of real world sneaks in a good way in the film, but I think what's so virtuous about the program is that it really does bring people together face to face in ways that feel like they're increasingly fleeting, people from different points of view, as Amanda was saying when we started the conversation. And that sort of analog, old-fashioned conversation, that civil discourse, I'd love to hold on to as long as, as we bring in these newer dimensions of the complexities of politics.
Yeah, I mean, and look, the relationship between these four gentlemen tells you everything on the positive aspects of what it means to being there, being in person, engaging in this. Because if you like the person you're negotiating with on the other side, everybody wins. And ultimately, that's that good government comes that way. Let's see, all of you guys, hopefully I'm not doing Meet the Press by the time you guys are all in elective office. But if you are, I hope I can get your first interview, whether that's with Governor MacDougall, Congressman Feinstein, Senator Garza. All right, I'm not going to appoint it, or Secretary Otero there. I don't want to make you any of you president yet. Okay, you guys got to work a little harder on that. And Amanda, Jesse, congratulations to you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck.